Hello, how are you doing? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be naming my England squad, what I think the England squad should be for the upcoming autumn internationals. So Eddie Jones is going to name his squad on Monday. I've gone through all the names and picked who I think I would select in a 34-man squad. Always going to be some bones of contention there, so if you're new here, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and most importantly, particularly for a video like this, drop a comment down below. What do you make of my selections? Who do you want to see in Eddie Jones's England squad? It's always a controversial talking point. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so this was more difficult than I thought because when you get to selecting an international side, I think there's always players that are completely stand out, first names on the team sheet, and it's quite easy. What becomes difficult is selecting the backups or even the guys that probably aren't going to get game time but you maybe want in the squad anyway. So that's what I kind of struggled with. So as I said in the intro, do let me know what you think on some of my selections. I've been frantically making notes on different players and trying to make sure I don't forget anyone. But let's get into it. Let's see how I go. And we're going to start in the front row. So in terms of injuries to front row players at the moment, I think Beno Abano is one of the big ones. He hasn't really been involved at all in England squads recently because he's had awful luck with injury. He got injured in the first game of the Premiership season against Bristol. So he is out. But outside of that, I think I'm right in saying that Eddie Jones has a relatively clean bill of health to select from. So first of all, for the number 1 jersey, I've gone for Mako Vunipola. That depends on his ban because he got a red card at the weekend and it looked like a little bit of a nasty one. It's one of those that you never know could end up being a bit more of a lengthy ban, in which case he might not really be available for selection because he might miss the first couple of autumn internationals. So that's one we'll have to wait and see. But I've gone for Mako Vunipola. I've gone for Joe Marler. He wasn't involved in England's tour of Australia. He took a little bit of time out away from the international game. So presuming that he is in contention for selection, wants to be back in that squad, I still think that he's one of the best scrummagers, one of the best props in England. So I'd go for Joe Marler. And then the other one, the first choice, the guy that I would have starting in the autumn, certainly against the better sides England play, is Ellis Genge. Moved back to Bristol, has looked really, really good so far. Didn't have his best performance against Exeter on Friday when Bristol were beaten heavily and Genge was sent to the sin bin and so on and so forth. But he still put in some massive hits in that game. I think he's playing really well and he just continues to develop as a player. He's international quality now. I think he's got to the point where he's England's starting player in that position. So I've gone for Ellis Genge. If Mako, by the way, isn't available, then Bevan Rodd would come in for me. He made his first start of the season for Sale against Leicester on the weekend. He's been relatively consistently selected in England squads in recent times. Fairly young guy as well. So it would be Bevan Rodd if Mako isn't available, but we'll wait and see. On the other side of the scrum in the 3 jersey, this was a little bit harder, I thought, than the other side of the scrum. I've gone for Carl Sinclair. Hasn't had a great start to the season, in all honesty. I don't think his form's been that good, but he's been part of a Bristol side that have been a little stuttery, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt there. So I've gone for him. I've gone for Patrick Schickling at Exeter. I mean, Will Stewart's a guy that we've seen selected a lot, but I just think Bath have been so poor, I probably wouldn't select him there. Trevor Davison at Newcastle, we've seen him selected. Joe Hayes at Leicester, who's got 5 England appearances. So there are a few guys that were kind of around selection there. I've gone for Patrick Schickling because, again, a young guy, physically literally a big body, but physically has the attributes, I think, to play consistently at international level. So I think Eddie might give him a go. That's who I'd go for. And then probably the dark horse of selection in my squad, but I know plenty of people will be calling for him to be involved, is Dan Cole, the experienced campaigner. We haven't seen him in an England shirt since the World Cup final. So this is probably the left field suggestion within my squad. But I just think he's been playing so well. He's still rock solid at the scrum. And I'd like to give him a go, particularly with some of those other guys I mentioned. I mentioned Davison and Hayes, and I don't think there's an obvious candidate to be coming in for that final berth. Dan Cole, I think, can still do a job. He was brilliant last year for Leicester. I would select him in that England team. Okay, next up, let's go hooker. Injuries to Jamie George and Nick Dolly. Big one for Jamie George as well, because I think he had re-established himself as England's number one, so he won't be involved, which leaves it open a little bit. Luke Cowan-Dickie will be the number one. Came off the bench for extra against Bristol. Looks in really, really good form. With no Jamie George there, he's the first choice. Then it became a lot more difficult for me, I thought, personally. As I said, with Dolly injured, you've got a few other guys you can mention. Jamie Blameyer at Newcastle. He's actually been playing on the flank for the Falcons. But I've gone for two names, in fact, in terms of hooker. So Blameyer is one of those, partly because of his versatility, the fact that he can play in the back row as well. I don't necessarily think we need him in the back row because we've got a lot of strength in depth there. But that maybe tipped the balance in his favour for my selection. And then I've gone for three hookers, the other one being Jack Walker at Harlequins. Maybe a bit more of a surprise selection, would be making his England debut, but has played consistently well for Harlequins now. He joined them from Bath and he's kind of steadily progressed and made his way up. And I just think maybe it's time to give him a go, given that, in my opinion, we're not screaming with options off the page when you jot everyone down. I think maybe let's give Jack Walker a go. So Cowan-Dickie, Jack Walker, Blameyer for the hookers. Second row. Now, this was interesting because it's Maro Itoje and Johnny Hill, first choice starters. Easy, job done. After that, I found it quite difficult here. I found it quite a difficult selection. I've gone for Ollie Chessum. I would have probably gone Nick Asikwe, but he's injured as well. So he's not going to be available. Hasn't played for Saracens this year. He had an operation at the start of September and he's expected to be out for a few months. So no Nick Asikwe. I've gone for Ollie Chessum. Again, he's a bit more versatile. He can play second row. He can play back row. He's been good for Leicester over the last 12 months or so, even though they haven't had a great start to the season. So I went with him. There's obviously the likes of Alex Coles that you could have selected. But in all honesty, I was looking at that second row, and outside of Itoje and Hill, I found it quite difficult to nail on exactly who I wanted there. So I've gone with Ollie Chessum. Let me know what you think. Also, only 3 second rows is probably a mistake. I'd imagine Jones will select more. But part of the reason I've only gone for 3 is because if we get on to the back row, one of the first names on the team sheet is Courtney Lawes. He's going to captain the side. He can shift into the second row, although I think even he now would say that he's a back row player rather than in the second row. But that was part of my thinking with only selecting 3, as you do have Courtney Lawes there as a backup. So I've gone for him. I've gone for Tom Curry again, who I think is one of the first names on the team sheet. And I've gone for Billy Vunipola, who was really, really impressive on that tour in Australia. Then after that, Dombrand, I think, missed the Australia tour, but again has been in good form for Harlequins. He'll come in, so it'll be him and Vunipola competing for the number 8 berth. I've then gone for Lewis Ludlam, who I think has been really impressive for Northampton. He is such a aggressive ball carrier. He's aggressive over the ball in the ruck. Just one of those guys who goes about his business week in, week out, but I think steadily has just improved and continues to improve into a really high-class operator. So I'd go for Ludlam, and then I'd go for Jack Willis, who over the ball, like in the jackal, Jack Willis is as good as anyone in the world. And I don't think England quite have anyone can do the damage in that area that he can. He obviously had a massive issues with injury, where he had that horrible knee injury in the Six Nations a few years ago, which took him about a year to recover. He's come back. I think he's looking really, really good. So I'd go for Jack Willis. So Courtney Lawes, Tom Curry, Dombrand, Ludlam, Willis, Vunipola for my back row options. Okay, let's move on to scrum half. I think Eddie Jones will select 3. I think he's going to take 3 to the World Cup, even though he only took 2 into the last World Cup. Rafi Quirk, who in my last video talking about Sale and Leicester, I waxed lyrical about him. I think he's absolutely brilliant. I think he's the best scrum half if he can get a run of games in England. He's a young guy. He's the future of the 9 jersey for England, in my opinion. So Rafi Quirk. I'll go for Jack Van Portfleet, because I think he impressed in Australia. Again, another young guy, kind of building towards the future a little bit. And then I think it will be Ben Youngs. I'd go for Ben Youngs in terms of the experience that he can bring. At fly half, well, it's going to be Marcus Smith and Owen Farrell. Outside of that, I haven't selected anyone, which could potentially be a risk, because I think Farrell's going to play at inside centre with Smith at 10. It means if Smith goes down, Farrell could potentially shift to 10, and then you have other options in the centres. So fly half, it's Owen Farrell and Marcus Smith for me. Onto the centres, Henry Slade and Manu Tuolangi, I would expect to be the first choice options there. Both of those guys back fit, so I've gone for them. I've gone for Ollie Lawrence, recently of Worcester, now of Bath, of course, who I think's actually had quite an impressive start to the season. He's still got things to work on in his game, But I saw him on the opening day of the season, or certainly Worcester's first game, where they went away to London Irish. And for the first 10-15 minutes, he looked really, really impressive. And then he was playing in a side who didn't have a pre-season with all sorts of issues going on, and they fell away. But I thought Ollie Lawrence looked quite good, so I've gone with him. I've gone for Joe Marchant, who has actually really been playing on the wing a lot more for Harlequins, but we've seen him in the centre for England. He gives you the option of he can play in the back three, he can play in the centres, and also he balances out the fact that Tuolangi and Lawrence are kind of those harder, big crash-up ball carriers a bit more. Marchant complements Slade a little bit more, or not complements Slade, but he is more similar to Slade in that he's a bit quicker, perhaps a little bit more athletic in terms of the outside channels. So I think that's a nice balance. I've also gone for a fifth centre in Will Joseph, because I'm hearing really, really good things of him out of London Irish. He can play centre. He has been playing on the wing again, so he's another one of those guys that can flip-flop between positions, which I think is going to be really, really important for England, particularly building ahead to the World Cup. You need versatility, so I'd give him a go. Just quickly finish off with the back three. In terms of the wings, I've gone for Jack Nowell, Joe Thucknasinger, Caden Murley and Tommy Freeman. Caden Murley has had a brilliant start to the year with Harlequins. There are so many other players we could mention, whether it be Johnny May, Adam Radwan, Max Malins, Anthony Watson has just come back. That's why I'm not selecting him. But if he probably had a more run of games, I would have selected him. I think Eddie Jones might select him because he's a big, big fan of his. But yeah, I think Caden Murley's been absolutely outstanding, deserves his chance. Jack Nowell is back with Exeter and is just such an all-round operator on the wing. I think Eddie Jones will select Joe Thucknasinger because he likes his size. Again, it's just giving you a different option depending on what you want to select. And Tommy Freeman, deceptively quick, made his debut on that tour of Australia. Again, I think you'd like to see him in that international setup a little bit more just to see how he keeps developing. And then finally, two fullbacks, Harry Arundel and Freddie Stewart. Freddie Stewart is the nailed-on 15 at the moment. Harry Arundel is the up-and-comer. He is so explosive, so exciting. We all want to see more of him. And actually, what I would do when it comes to selection, I'd probably select Arundel on one of the wings, maybe with a Jack Nowell or someone experienced, with Stewart at fullback. But in terms of the selection of this squad and how I mapped it out, I've got him down as one of the fullbacks. I'd probably start him on the wing. All right, that's really quickly my team. Eddie Jones names his squad on Monday. Remember, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment down below. What do you make of my selection? I'll see you in the next one.